Hi and welcome to E-ZTutoring. Today we are going to cover how to find all of your rational zeros by implementing Descartes' rule of signs. So let's jump straight into it. Let's suppose that we have a function here, x to the fourth plus x squared minus 2. Now I'm going to assume you guys are familiar with Descartes' rule of signs. If you are not familiar, be sure to check out my video on it. So in Descartes' rule of signs, we simply split this up into a positive and a negative function. So our f of x function would just remain the same, and our f of negative x function will also remain the same because these are all even exponents. So let's take a look at all of our sign changes now. We have positive to positive, positive to negative. We have one sign change, and same thing over here since they're the same function. So one sign change on each means we have one possible positive zero. And over here, this means we have one possible negative zero. So after we have found that, this information is going to really guide us into finding the actual zeros of this trinomial. So now, on to finding the actual zeros. You will need to use the method of finding all possible rational zeros. If you guys are not familiar with that, I have a video on that as well. So in order to do that, we will need plus or minus p over q. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this because in this video we're combining all these different methods and I don't want to focus too much on this. So plus or minus p, we take all the divisors of negative 2, which is plus or minus 1, and plus or minus 2. And q is just 1. We take all the divisors of 1, which are just plus or minus 1. So this is equal to just plus or minus 1 or plus or minus 2. So we have four possible zeros that we need to test out. And like I said earlier, this information is going to really help us narrow it down. So now on to finding the actual zeros. So if we want to find the actual zeros, you start with these numbers and you start plugging in. So let's say we take 1. We will start off with the possible positive zeros. So we are doing positive 1. So we plug in 1 into the function, and we get 1 to the fourth plus 1 squared minus 2, which is equal to just 1 plus 1 minus 2, which is equal to 0. So just like that, we have found one of the zeros. Because when we plug it in, we got 0, so 1 is a possible 0. Now you'll notice Descartes' rule of signs tells us that we have only one positive 0. And we just found the positive 0, so there are no more positive zeros. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we don't have to test out positive 2. That tells us that the only other possible zeros are negative 1 and negative 2. So we don't have to test out any more positive ones. In this case, I mean, yes, we only have four possible zeros, but in a case where you have a lot, this rule will come in extremely handy. All right, so now let's try out the negative zeros. Let's do f of negative 1. We have negative 1 to the fourth plus negative 1 squared minus 2 equals 1 plus 1 minus 2, which is 0. So we just found another 0. Negative 1 makes this function 0, so it's a 0. Now, what does Descartes' rule of signs tell us? Descartes' rule says that we have only one possible negative 0. Well, we just found a negative 0, which means there are no more negative zeros. So that tells us that negative 2 cannot be a 0, that it's impossible. So that's how Descartes' rule of signs really helps you narrow down your zeros. Now, one more thing, if you guys do remember, is our degree of this function is 4, which means that we have 4 zeros in total. Now, we only have 2 zeros from Descartes' rule of signs. So if we only have 2 zeros, and there are 4 zeros total, that means that there are going to be 2 imaginary solutions. Now, this question doesn't ask us to find the imaginary solutions, it only asks us to find the rational zeros. I'm sorry, instead of solutions, I should have said zeros, but if you had to find your imaginary zeros, all you would do is you would just factor this, just like a regular quadratic. Just imagine that this is a 2 and a 1 and just factor it. That would give you your imaginary zeros, but other than that, that is how you implement Descartes' rule of signs to find all of your possible rational zeros. All right, so hope this makes more sense. Hope you guys understand this now. If you guys ever want ACT or SAT help, be sure to visit my website, www.e-ztutoring.com. Thank you guys and have a good day.